Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Good morning, good afternoon, and wherever you are, perhaps good evening.
We're on already.
And welcome. It's time to pour the tea.
Here we are.
And that tells you that it's...
You made the big pot. This is serious.
It is serious. It's been a serious morning from a bunch of perspectives. We have discovered a catastrophe in the kitchen.
It was not a catastrophe.
Well, it was for about 30 seconds.
We thought that we had run out of Frank's hot sauce.
What sort of an establishment runs out of Frank's hot sauce?
Notice we did not, however.
Yeah, good on you,
There was a jumbo. I'd love to know just if there are any other folks who sort of have a hot sauce requirement in their life, and if so, do you have a brand of choice? Because I think Frank's is a particular thing. It's what I like about it is that it's vinegary. It's not too hot. Oh, there's the stirring tea sound. Anyway, you have a topic. Oh, don't make that sound when you laugh. You have a topic in mind that I couldn't prep for. This is one of the few podcasts where I haven't arrived with an organon full of sticky notes or sporting Benninghausen's lesser writings or something.
That sounds somewhat stressful for you.
It's not, actually.
It might actually go fine, but it could be, catastrophic and disastrous.
Are you insinuating that I can't speak without notes?
No, what I'm insinuating is that I'm also unprepared.
I know.
No, I'm actually not prepared because I want to tell you that I, last night, listened to an hour and a half long podcast.
What?
Yeah, of the Kelsey boys.
Oh, right. I actually wouldn't mind listening to them.
They do their own ads.
Do they?
And they do them in funny voices, like, Athletic Greens.
Yeah.
If they're doing the Athletic Greens. It is your... doorway to an amazing future. It's sort of like this really weird
I like it.
Advertisement stuff.
We should do that.
I don't think so. No, because we've got Kaylee with the hot voice.
Voice for it.
She's got a great voice for it.
And this is really good tea.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want more, get it sooner than later because that's going to go bitter.
Okay.
Better.
What are we talking about?
So what I wanted to talk to you about, actually, by popular demand, our audience out there in podcast land asked about something which I drop every now and again. And so the conversation is around traditional and scientific evidence.
Science!
No. Well, we can talk about science if you want to. Of course, in relationship to homeopathy. But right. I want to contextualize it because it's important. Well, I think it's important. So, see, when you think about the resources that we have in a homeopathy, the way that you think about them, it would be a division between primary and secondary sources.
Well, that's...
But, you would conceive of...
There is that binary.
Yeah, there is, isn't there?
Yeah.
And so, but let's elaborate on that.
I think there's nuance.
Well, there sure is. But a primary source, by definition, would be the raw research. So for us, provings.
Yep.
And then there is the secondary sources, which is opinion. And that is, it can be amazing opinion. It could be Vithalking opinion or Roger Morrison opinion or Farouk Master opinion.
Where does clinical evidence come in?
Well,
are you getting to that?
That's where I'm heading.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to.
All right. What we've got, when you think about it, folks, okay, you're going about your business, or if you're learning homeopathy, you are a homeopath, you go about your business, you make your clinical decisions, but you're referring to resources.
Right.
And those resources are either primary or the secondary. Now, primary resources are often valued by some folks, and there's some real advantages to primary resources. Some of the advantages are that it's the words of the mouth of the prover, right? Out of the mouth of the prover. It's unfiltered. It's unbiased in a way because usually there's no cultural or gender filters that get in the way. But there's also disadvantages as well, and we all know the disadvantages of the provings, right? Millions of words, thousands of pieces of information, too much to remember,
right.
And often just like a garbled jumble of information coming at you like a fire hose, right?
I mean, for people who perhaps have not read a proving, the way that a proving works, well, a well-done proving will have multiple provers.
Well done.
And what do you think of as the optimal number for a proving?
Well, these days, 26 is the magic
26,
number.
yeah.
But most don't.
Yeah, but 26.
Yeah.
I mean, and then what happens is it should be triple blind. In other words, the provers and the supervisors don't know what the substance is until it's revealed at the end. There is minimal, if any, contact between the provers, and certainly should not be any about symptoms. The supervisor should take the case of the prover to understand their baseline of health beforehand, and then all the provers should take the remedy at or about the same time. And there should be very frequent communication between the prover and the supervisor in the early hours and days of the proving, and notes should be taken by both for comparison. And then at the end, at whatever point, there's something that's usually referred to as a proving extraction, and then everybody tells their story of what happened, and it's unbelievable when you realize, all the people that have experienced the same symptom or had the same dreams or had, similar experiences. Anyway, what happens is all of that data just gets put into a really big document that's organized. There are different iterations of the organization. It could just be the list of all the symptoms organized by prover, but most of the time it goes through a secondary iteration where it's done by theme or by organ system and so forth. Either way, it's a data dump, and there's so much information, and so provings, what we tend to like about provings are the summaries. And when someone who has chewed through the information and really thought about it and sort of assimilated it can give it back to us in a form that makes sense.
So what you've just described, with one exception, is the other harmonized proving guidelines from the ECH and Liga and the HPUS.
Yeah. What's the exception?
The exception is that the unblinding of the study is never done in a group context. And it's always done at a very specific point. And that's where Jeremy Sherr's provings are sometimes they're not controversial, but it's just, there's different opinion about
the extraction.
About the extraction and the unblinding.
Okay, I had no idea about that. That's my favorite part.
Yeah, it's also, but in terms, it's not, no, let's talk about it. It's the part of the study where there's still the potential for the inclusion of background white noise.
I see.
And as I've understood it over the years, the folks at the more right wing end of doing provings are of the opinion that extraction process should be done completely separately by an expert.
But can everyone be included? Or no, it should be.
Not watching. I think it's turning it into a festival.
I have to say, to me, that festival is the reward for the suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would not otherwise have participated in the radon proving. Albeit I was a supervisor, but you still, every time you engage in a proving, there is potential for suffering to be done. But I would have had FOMO, and it was the extraction that I wanted to be there for.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't think it's a big deal. It's certainly not the topic of the day.
No.
But the extraction is that part. Anyway, the point is, because you just gave a beautiful description of a good, a sound method of a modern proving. So there are advantages, but then there's disadvantages to them, and you mentioned that. And then there's secondary data, or secondary sources. And those secondary sources, I'm looking up at the shelf and I see the red book, that's Morrison's desktop, whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's Vermeulen's old green concordant.
The concordant. Everyone should have a concordant.
Exactly. And the bulk of our literature, when you look on the library bookshelf, is secondary sources. And that's where Lippy and Herring and Kent and whoever else look at or take information from and cherry-picked information from the primary sources and write up their materia medica books or their therapeutics books.
Yeah.
Richard Pitt's opinion is this.
Yeah.
And that's where the filters, there's advantages and disadvantages. Because the advantages are you get the benefit of 40 years of Farouk's experience.
Yeah.
And, Rajan says this and whoever says that. The disadvantage is that it comes through filters.
Yeah.
Right? And it is my opinion that from my practice, see, every sentence should start with from my clinical experience in my practice, in my geographical location, this is my opinion.
But I think it's even somewhat, it's that and it's something else, because you think about somebody like Fatak, for example, right? I mean, I'm thinking about just who he is, the context, Indian medical doctor.
Yeah.
Well, he was around, in the 70s?
Oh, 70s? That book was published in the 70s, so,
right?
Yeah.
And so you have, as you were saying, there's sort of the cultural influence and the fact that he's a medical doctor and all that. But then I was looking at Richard Pitt's book the other day, doing a differential. And that's what's that book called? It's like Comparative Materia Medica of Old and New Remedies, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's...
he's got a new one coming, by the way.
Oh, does he?
He just wrote to me about it.
Oh, you're kidding. Aw.
He's in Spain. Shout out
he
to
never
Richard.
stops moving. He's a good egg, that one. Anyway, so his that book, I love the fact that if you're thinking, so for example, I was doing a differential with the students in clinic the other day, and I thought when I was putting together my notes, that was one of the places that I went to see if I missed anything. Yeah, because he's doing comparative stuff. So we were looking at a comparison between, well, I don't want to say what the remedies were because client information. Anyway, but then I was reading in his introduction, which I had never done, because I just bypass sort of the inputs of the filter, because I know what I'm looking for. And then I thought, oh, he says something that I actually would never really incorporate in my practice. It's like the primary state, the failed state, the something state, the this, the that, whatever, which is, I'm sure, super meaningful to him. And probably when he was a teacher, it's probably something he conveyed to his students, which would be a filter through which they would receive this information. Whereas for me, I don't quite understand the context of it. So I just skip it and go to the materia medica. But then I was thinking, oh, wow, our students would read that and it would be out of context. So secondary source material also, especially when it comes to homeopathy, it doesn't just include, like you were saying, the part about, well, this has been my clinical experience, but it's also my interpretation of philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And we're now heading towards the topic of the day, because we're not quite there yet. And that is that theoretically, in the world of science, the primary data is objective and the secondary data is subjective.
Subjective, right.
Yeah. And so the subjectivity of that secondary sources is important. Now, let's just go into a parallel universe.
As we often do.
As we do.
In our podcast.
And let's talk about the advent of evidence-based medicine. And I actually did a bit of a dive into this a long time ago, but evidence-based medicine actually comes out of the brain of this guy called Sackett. And I think I'm not wrong that he was working at, is there a place in Canada called Hamilton? I just, for some reason, remember Hamilton, or University of Hamilton, or something like that. Anyway, he is thinking about the problem with medicine. And the problem with medicine, in his mind at the time, was expert opinion. The problem with medicine, or one of the problems of medicine historically, has been expert opinion. Expert opinion, of course, can mean so many different things. If you've got a really lovely family physician that's been around for 40 years and seen the generations of your kids grow up, that's perfect. That's a beautiful expert opinion.
Yeah.
And clinical decisions are made because of my experience, my 40 years of experience. But there's a lot of difference between experts and opinions. And one of the challenges for medicine as it, became more mature in, say, the 30s, 40s, 50s, into the 60s, and definitely by the 70s, was the range of and the inequity of that expert opinion. And so the origins of evidence-based medicine were, in addition to expert opinion, let's look around at the best possible evidence and then make our clinical decisions. And then thirdly, based on the cultural perspectives of the client.
Oh, interesting.
That's how it started. And to my mind, if I think of a really good set of criteria for making nice clinical decisions, I want an expert, I want good evidence, and I want it to be pitched to the cultural perspectives of whoever the client is. But that's, of course, not what it is now, right? No. Evidence-based medicine has just, turned into a series of protocols determined by lawyers and insurance salesmen.
Well, it's interesting because, and tell me if this is too tangential, but I'm just thinking about this as, right, but why would that ever be an issue on this podcast? No, but, I'm working on my seminar for the Florida Homeopathic Society, and I've been going through tons and tons and tons of articles on emerging trends in autoimmunity.
Right. Perfect.
And what's really interesting is looking at the part of, the conclusion in every article, which is basically we have no idea what this is about. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, there are so many confounding factors. We're able to nail down this one small piece of it, but at the end of the day, it's so complicated and complex, right?
Yep.
And so one of the things about that I've actually been thinking about this idea of evidence is that, what happens in science when you push the edge of what you actually can know? So in other words, right now, right, when I, as a homeopath, look at all of the emerging trends in autoimmunity, and it almost seems weird to say emerging trends in autoimmunity, especially since so much of my talk is just tying it back to Hahnemann's original theories, but basically what's happening now that's happening in a large enough swath of the population such that there are, lots of academic articles, written about it.
Yep.
And so we're the edge that I feel like we're pushing is that we've gone so far into the reductionistic paradigm that it's got to come back to the whole, because autoimmunity is a whole person issue. And
Good.
Just the idea that you have more, once you have an autoimmunity diagnosis, I forget the percentage, it's like 20% or more greater likelihood of having a second and a third autoimmune diagnosis, which is basically just saying that more of your stuff is breaking, but it's all the same disease, especially according to Hahnemann. Yep. So in this way, not only are we stretching sort of the against the edges of what we know. So, for example, you'll read one of these studies and it'll say we only know so much in the genetic research. We only know so much about the microbiome. Like, for example, I read this article that was slightly above my pay grade of full understanding, but there are people who are trying to calculate the number of bacteria in the human body. Mm-hmm. And it seems impossible to do, and they've got like all these.
That'd be a big number.
It's a big number, but also the way that they calculate it is very similar to the way that I try to calculate Fahrenheit versus Celsius.
Oh dear.
A really complex equation.
Back to subjectivity.
Exactly. So it's interesting, right? So when you're talking about sort of evidence-based medicine, the confounding factors are so far beyond how we can understand that evidence. So if you have like a person who, like I have a client that is undergoing some pretty intensive cancer treatment, and so looking at the criteria that have gone into choosing the chemotherapeutic cocktail that she's getting, right? I thought to myself, and she's like amazing in terms of how she's able to sort of interface with what she's getting, right? Anyway, but I was thinking, well, gosh, in that pharmacology world, how can they possibly know? If you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5, interventions, and then you've got the individual susceptibility of the person. Of course, the homeopath would come up with that. How can you possibly predict an outcome?
Exactly. And especially because, looking at a complex problem, a complex holistic problem through the lens of reductionism, you're going to meet your walls really quickly. And that is a nice segue to then getting to the next part. Can I get to the next part that I want to talk to you about? So let's just put aside evidence-based medicine for the minute,
Yeah.
And go, and then, can I get conspiratorial? No.
There's a whole big swath of the audience going, please, please.
Please, please. Look, for the whole of human history, whether it's 60,000 years, 40,000 years, or I don't know, whatever your opinion is, for the whole of human history, all of healthcare and all of medicine has been delivered from the perspective of respecting and manipulating vital force. Correct?
Whether it was called vital force or not.
And in most cultures, it would have been called something else.
Yeah.
Except for the last
prana, blah, blah,
80
blah.
years
Yeah.
with Western reductionistic medicine.
Only 80 years? No, more. When would you say the biomedical not revolution?
Well, fair enough. 150 years. So.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. But if we, and I think what I just said, it doesn't matter where you are on the planet. You could be in Southern Africa, Northern America, Western Europe, Eastern Asia, doesn't matter, and New Zealand, that any form of healthcare respected the flow of energy and balance.
Yes.
And also not angering the gods, depending on where you were in human history.
Right, exactly. That would have...
So that is... And then the conspiratorial part of that is that, you know, whether you're an Inuit Indian or an Aztec or a Mayan or a Maori or an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, where you are in the world, a Bushman in the Kalahari or a Bantu, colonialism messed with your medical system. And it messed with that medical system firstly by ignoring it and then legislating against it.
Yes.
And so in various countries around the world, and now we're getting into the 17 and 1800s, because with the way in which, say, Holland,
the Dutch
Belgium,
West Indies,
the Dutch, then the Brits, and then, you know, Germany to a small extent in some parts of the world. But the way that the Africa was carved up, Asian colonial influence, the what I call the pink parts of the map.
I love when you call it that. Yeah.
You know, the way the British suppressed the Canadian Indian culture, the way they legislated in Parliament against the Tohunga in New Zealand, the Tohunga Suppression Act, whenever it was. What that meant was that traditional medicine went underground.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, if it was, because every tradition around the world is oral.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you miss a generation, you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
Because if there was an epidemic or warfare, and the generation of the next shamanic generation was not there, then you're in desperate trouble as a traditional culture. And this is where I want to take it, because in the clawing back of traditional medicine and traditional values is involved with finding language and reconnecting to the land and finding tribalism and spirit and all of those things that have been suppressed by, well, firstly those colonial powers, but also reductionism.
Well, and that's where I would like to come in. Okay, when you said you kind of gave me a window into the topic, I didn't expect this is where we're going, but I've got a piece that I think we have to add to it.
Good.
Which, you know, homeopathy was meant to be the medicine, the new medicine for the new world.
Yeah.
Hahnemann lived during this time when the beginning of colonial medicine would have taken place, if I've got my dates right.
Sure.
Yeah,
17th,
right? It's around the same time. And, you know, and just as an aside, it was such a big part of my studies in the history of medicine.
Right.
I mean, it is really, it's amazing to see how much that impacted what happened in health. But it wasn't the only thing. And Hahnemann, I think, is really uniquely positioned because he lived on the cusp of traditional medicine, what I would say Hippocratic medicine, where a person being in balance with the elements was the way that health was defined. Whether you go pre-Hippocratic, the gods are angry, or whether you go, you know, further on into just the balance of the elements, that was still a part of Hahnemann's lineage.
that part is the part that's somewhat different. Hold that thought just for a minute, because that's the difference between, if you like, Stone Age and Bronze Age, Iron Age, and then Bronze Age development. Because in those shamanic cultures, I'm going to call them shamanic cultures around the world, that didn't have a concept of a personalized god. That comes from the Greeks. So that's a Western European concept. In other parts of the world, it's especially where animism is predominant. That means that you're seeing spirit within the rock, within the tree, within the river.
No doubt.
That's different from the Greeks.
But even still, because Hahnemann was, as a polymath.
So do you see homeopathy in that tradition?
I see it in both.
Okay.
I see it in both. This is what I'm saying. Hahnemann sits right on that cusp where he's got one foot in balance of the elements, balance of the person in nature, right? That's the Constitution, right? And he has the other foot in disease. Yeah.
And modern pathological understanding of disease.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, Hahnemann was, his understanding of miasma, right? Of, a morbific agent. He understood that there were contagions, Look, you read Hahnemann's essay on epidemics. That was, I don't know if I have it in a copy of the first edition of the Organon, but it's probably in lesser writings if somebody's looking for it. And Hahnemann was a proponent of social distancing. He understood that if there is a contagious disease going around, stay away from the person who's sick with it, because it will transmit to you through the little particles in the air. So Hahnemann understood the basis of disease, and then some. I mean, it's almost ridiculous to say, because of the profundity of what he actually grasps, that I think, by the time you get to chronic diseases, it's like hard to even find the words for it, because we're still struggling, right, to really explain it. But he sits on this cusp. That's what I think makes homeopathy so perfect.
Well, I'm going to agree with you, but there's a piece that I want to talk about that's in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So if we go from the point that I made about evidence-based medicine, and then the point that I made about, let's say, geographical and historical understanding of health and disease, in all sorts of various places around the world, let's call that traditional medicine. So for me, there's, in a way, I'm not talking about the differences between the medicine that was practiced in Peru in ancient times and Maori medicine in New Zealand, because they're basically, they're more similar than different. Right? So then the thing that I want to mention is that there's an extraordinary revival and interest in traditional medicine. The ayahuasca phenomena in Brooklyn or in Peru. Or the fact that you cannot get into a traditional Maori medicine course because they're so booked at the moment, is also being recognized by public health and the World Health Organization, all of the authorities. Because there's a crisis with medicine, and of course, no one can afford it. It's a delusion that this is affordable. Western medicine is affordable. If you want effective medicine that's cost effective, and efficiency and appropriateness and access, then those ministers of health around the world, in all sorts of governments, west or east, need to look at all of the complementaries, or all of the traditional complementary and integrative medicines. So the term now is being used as TCIM, and in the World Health Organization, the T part and the C part are being attended to. And you think about those countries like Malaysia or Cuba or Brazil, where you've got massive populations that are requiring, urgent attention, and you've got traditional knowledge and traditional systems of healing that are just there, and they're ready to go, and there's a respectability and an acknowledgement of them. Now, of course, the problem is that the logic, or no, not the logic, that's not the word I meant, but the clinical decision-making process is traditional. It's oral, and it's inductive, And so is homeopathy.
Yeah.
And this is the thing which I'm fascinated about, because the naturopaths are I'd say 10 to 15 years ahead of us. So naturopathy, while it's often confused with functional medicine, is at the same time positioning itself as meeting all of the requirements of a traditional medicine.
Oh, brilliant.
And,
I love it.
Right. Now, the requirements of a traditional medicine, I don't know if you know it, it's 3 generations. That's it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's 3 generations of uninterrupted use. And with a distinct theory, philosophy, and all the rest of it. And, someone might take me to task on that, but that's my understanding of the reading. And so homeopathy easily fits into that criteria.
Sure.
You know? And so from a philosophical perspective, we are traditional because we're inductive, meaning that we are bottom up, observational processes, our decision-making processes are all inductive and not deductive, except for recent times. Now, all of the energy that we put into writing scientific papers, I mean, you and I know it because we're at the forefront of it. And actually, I love it. And this is what was so cool about what you just said, because I love the fact that I can design a simple clinical study, let's say on silicosis,
right,
and then ask that question, is homeopathy going to be effective in the condition of silicosis? Come up with a method of answering that question, and let's go and do it.
Right.
And if we do that and write it up, that's scientific knowledge, right? But that's not what we do in homeopathy. What we do in homeopathy, especially to get to silica as an intervention, is inductive.
Yeah.
That's traditional knowledge.
I mean, I think part of what you're saying, though, is about what I always call the bridge, right?
Right.
Which is we're sort of at a point in time where we have to meet the problem where it is, and we have to be adaptive in order to be able to engage in the conversation dominated by science, right? I want to...
At this point, there's something important to say, and that is that if you can hear a motor running, we're just being joined by the cat.
Hildegard of Bingen, she always turns up for a good podcast.
Okay.
But, this is why so some of the folks might know that we organized a part of the Joint American Homeopathy Conference this year to be a research track for the conference. And both Al and I are speaking, Betsy Rice from Sonoran University and Kieran Cooley, who is a Canadian naturopath.
Yeah, the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine.
Yeah. And so we chose to partner with and to bring in 2 naturopaths for the very reasons that Alastair is bringing up, which is there's a way in which the naturopaths are a bit ahead of us, and that they are, especially those who are engaged in research. And I think I really look to both the work of Elizabeth Rice and Kieran Cooley as being so just forward, pushing the conversation forward. And that's something that we've been really trying to do, is align ourselves with this conversation as a way to take seriously what we do and to, look into the ways in which we can, build that bridge.
Yeah.
But what else it made me think about, surprisingly, is an episode of Northern Exposure, a recent episode that we watched. So Shelley had a rash.
Shelley.
Hey,
Shell.
She had a rash all over her arms, and so she goes to Dr. Fleischman, who immediately gives all kinds of big words and diagnoses her with contact dermatitis and gives her a topical steroid to take home. And she comes back the next day, and it's worse. It's all over. It's spread. Meantime, Marilyn, who works at the front desk, Marilyn is there, and she had invited her cousin, or her cousin had asked for an invitation. Her cousin,
the traditional healer,
is a traditional healer, Alaskan Inuit healer, who wanted to just watch what was happening in Dr. Fleischman's office. And so Joel happens to be out one day, and the shaman is there. Shelley comes in. He looks at her arms, and he talks to her for a while. And did they go for a walk or something? I can't remember now.
Not sure.
But they have a long talk about what is going on, and he told her, well, it's spring. You're shedding your skin. And she said, oh, okay. And she left, right? And then later that day, Joel comes back, finds out that the shaman had given Shelley, what he considered to be the most ridiculous quackery information. He's all mad. He's all hot. And then he goes to the brick to get lunch, and there's Shelley, and she's completely better. And he says, how is this possible? Yeah, anyway.
I love it.
It was perfect.
It was perfect, actually. That marriage of...
Holling and Shelley?
Holling. No, they're not married.
Oh, right, they're not married.
That marriage of traditional and scientific medicine is what I'm talking about.
I was going completely in the wrong direction.
You see, here, homeopaths do not and are not informed by science. Right?
Say what?
No, listen up.
Okay, I'm listening.
Like Jennifer Jacobs in 1991 did the world's best, unbelievable clinical trial into children's diarrhea.
Yes.
And does anyone use homeopathy the way she did in that study?
No. Wow.
It's not informed anyone's clinical prescribing. Let me finish. Yeah. So we are a funny old group of people because we need science to validate our claims and to, be seen as respectable.
Yeah.
And the FDA will leave us alone. But on the other hand, we're not going to change our inductive, traditional, in fact, shamanistic ways of similars. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah. Because I tell you what, because, look, imagine if there was a piece of research that met all of the requirements that a homeopath would want to hear in a piece of scientific research, and that research said lycopodium actually is not really that good for problems at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Which I cannot believe.
Do you think any homeopath is going to change their behaviours as a consequence of that perfect piece of science?
You need to describe this, because this really blew my mind. No. Just that there was was it a reproving? No, somebody went through...
Jose Iziaga.
Oh, that's right.
Jose Iziaga is working in an Argentinian hospital, did a very cool piece of retrospective research.
Yeah.
And there's problems with that, but nevertheless. Anyway, there's challenges with it.
Yeah.
Some limitations. But what he did is he grabbed out of the filing cabinet the lycopodium cases.
Yeah.
They were all met a certain criteria. They were cured, and lycopodium had been the single remedy that did the business.
But none of them had a 4 to 8 p.m. aggravation.
So he went through and he looked, okay, what led to the clinical decisions?
Okay, but...
And it was abdominal discomfort, right to left, yellowness.
All the things. Yeah.
All the things, but not one of those cases had a 4 p.m. aggravation. One of the keynotes of lycopodium. All of the other keynotes of lycopodium were confirmed, but not that one. Do you see what I'm saying?
I had to lie down and put my feet up when I heard that.
You did, and unbutton your corset.
I couldn't believe it.
oh my, Mr. Darcy. I am unbuttoned. There you go. So look, I think that we as a broad community need to maintain our scientific links and directions. And we should hitch ourselves clearly to the traditional wagon, the traditional train. Traditional, complementary, and integrative medicine is the way forward.
And then we can get grandfathered into the who.
The who and the ha and the who and the wah. Well, it is that there is to have that... you see, traditional medical systems are being protected legally around the world again.
See,
and they're ahead of homeopathy.
But I just think that it is seen in a different way, homeopathy. I think it's a stretch.
Why?
I was thinking something really ridiculous. Because we don't have traditional outfits. We're not a part of a tribe. If
do you mean?
Think about it.
Pashminas and wheelie bags.
Pashminas and wheelie bags. That's our traditional garment.
Well, that used to be before the personal computer.
Right. But no, think about it seriously, though, because I think that part of and maybe I've got this definition wrong, but traditional medicine, well, and actually I guess naturopathy blows that out of the water. But I think of what when I think of the way that the WHO might be considering the idea of traditional medicine, it's more tribal, like you were describing. You know, it's medicine of a place and of a people. It's honoring a tradition.
No, but it
Is
can't
that not?
be.
It doesn't
well, no,
have to?
because if you think about it, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of Australia are literally hundreds of different nations
Right.
that are nomadic
Right.
traditionally. And so, no, there's an acknowledgement of place, but not necessarily of specific location. So there's also an acknowledgement that what one tribe in that place over there uses a herb for, the next tribe might use that herb differently. Again, there's an acknowledgement of that reality, and they are being regulated back into existence when we are, as professional homeopaths, not regulated back into existence. We're in the grey zone, the twilight zone.
Gosh,
from a
you've opened
regulatory
up
point of view.
Pandora's box. But I think you made me think about when I spoke at that conference in Romania when I was in Sibiu, and it was a conference. It was a traditional medicine conference with a focus on homeopathy.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, they emphasized the homeopathy because I was going to be there, and they made the Hahnemann bags, and I got all those cool things. Anyway, there was a woman who gave a talk about what has happened because of the generational skips in traditional medicine in the harvesting of plants and herbs and things.
Devastating.
Right? And she gave these examples of, two really similar plants with a completely different action. Mm-hmm. And, showed pictures, showed how they grow, showed how they're harvested and they're right next to each other. And it was like, oh my gosh, that kind of a mistake could be really... really devastating. So there's a lot of cleanup to do. Herb cleanup on aisle 5 in the traditional medicine department.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got a lot to think about. I'm not convinced of a few things in this. I got to work it through.
Okay.
That doesn't mean
do you know
that I
something?
won't become convinced.
I actually don't get convinced about much very often. Of this, I am sure.
Are you? Okay, good. Then we'll have to continue the conversation about it.
Yeah, I'd also just mention that the guidelines, there are developing, I'm going to say scientific or academic guidelines respecting traditional medicines that are being worked on. I was kind of very peripherally involved in a couple of surveys looking at the, I think I'm right in describing it, like guidelines, scientific guidelines, which would be acceptable in conventional scientific literature for doing surveys, studies, and research on traditional medicines.
I like this.
I like it as well.
I guess, as we're wrapping up, I'm going to say where I think
What are you wrapping up?
I've got a cute clinic in a couple minutes. I've got to get myself ready.
Oh, goodness me. All the makeup and the hair and all of this.
So, I was thinking.
Have you ever wondered why we don't do
video podcasts?
Video podcasts. There's a reason.
I don't know about that. It's really just where to put the camera. We tried it, and it was a little bit.
Yeah, we'd have to totally reinvent our space, wouldn't we?
Let's rearrange the furniture. Anyway, what I was going to say though was, I think where I'm having trouble getting to the same place where you're so true about this is it probably comes from this, I'm going to call it my bias, which is what Hahnemann did, what he discovered and what he figured out. It's almost like I think of what he did as being categoryless.
Because you're not convinced he's in the vitalist tradition, aren't you?
No, I am not convinced at all.
Right.
Yeah, I do not believe that
it
has anything to do with vitalism. That doesn't mean that there's an absence of understanding of vitality.
Right.
But the tradition of but vitalism means a particular thing, right? And so because he's attaching it to a different idea, which is how do we put life into an organism that's losing life? It's different than the vitalism, there's life in everything. I mean, one could argue, like on the last podcast when I brought out the organon and talked about aphorism 269, right? That when prepared in a particular way, right, we can extract that which is viable from within everything. That's different, though. That's a different principle. So that's a conversation for another day. We could talk about Matt Wood's book, The Magical Staff. Oh, which then was renamed to be called Vitalism.
You met him, didn't you?
Yeah, no, I not just met him. I would see him
In the cafe?
In the cafe when I lived in Minneapolis. Yeah, I would see him on the regular.
Magical staff, yeah.
Yeah, magical staff. Anyway, but what I was going to say, though, is I think Hahnemann sits... I'm totally fine with hitching our wagon to everything that you're talking about because it's part of the bridge building idea. It's what we need. But I think at the end of the day, what Hahnemann did sits by itself. The discoveries that he made they're not in opposition in any way to all of the traditional medicines.
I see what you're saying. No, I completely agree with you. It's a coherent, even though it's used by all sorts of other folks.
Yeah.
It is a complete and discrete system of medicine in the same way that osteopathy has its own complete.
But it's not just that. He cracked the code. He cracked the code. And that's why I think it's just this, when I think about it, it's like, oh, you hear all the angels singing and you see the glow around Hahnemann. I mean, it's a little hagiographic. Do you say hagiographic or hagiographic?
I stay well away from that word.
Do you altogether?
Reasons.
Yeah. I say it, I alternate how I say it so that I'm right half the time.
Right.
Yeah. But maybe enough people don't know the word that I'm clear. I think it's a soft G.
It reminds me of, Dom, my friend Dom.
Yeah.
He said once, he's a vociferous reader.
Yeah.
But he did come up with, don't you remember those halcyon days? He said once, I remember going,
oh boy.
Isn't that interesting? Anyway, it's totally relevant.
On that note.
All right, my good friends. Denise obviously has got things better to do than talk to me or you. So off you go.
Or maybe it's that somebody who's in this audience listening is sick and about to come to the helpline.
Right.
In which case they'll be really glad that I'm heading down to supervise a clinic.
Advertisement for the HHN, the...
Homeopathy Help Now.
If you're not feeling great...
homeopathyhelpnow.com.
Hit the website, navigate to the form, get excellent healthcare.
It's amazing. Let's just
traditional healthcare,
evidence-based. We sit
and
high on the evidence hierarchy. TCIM, all the things. But seriously, the HHN, we're about to hit our 4th birthday, March 20th. 2020 was our official start date. And since then, 5,000 cases.
Wow.
But
all right then, folks.
HHN, come to HHN if you need us. We'll help.
See you next week.
Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Home Foundation is hard at work. The Practitioner-Generated Research Network is like nothing the homeopathy community has seen before. Through the PGRN, we will be able to bring groundbreaking research to the world that will help protect homeopathy for generations to come. Learn more about how you can contribute to research at homefoundation.org. That's home, HOHM, foundation.org.